Yo, 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 what's going on, guys? It's Buns. Welcome back to the Road to Gladiator. Today I'm going to cover the 7.1 patch notes as there is a lot of new information and changes on the table, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an update for some of these changes and also give you guys my opinion on what do I think about these changes, what's relevant, what's not, and what you can look for. This is just my general overtake of what's happening in this expansion to give you guys a better idea for this patch and to get a feel for the changes when they hit today. Now, first thing I want to get on the table, this information is available on multiple websites, but the website that I've found to be the most helpful for myself is Wowhead. Now I'm going to give you guys a link down below in the description. You guys can check it out, but Wowhead has a really nice post written out. And for someone that's in PvP, I think it's great if you want to learn about multiple classes because they have a lot of the tooltips linked and you can just hover over them and it'll show the tooltips, which is nice. For someone like myself, I only play Rogue right now, so being able to see all the other tooltips is very helpful and it makes me more familiar with the other spells. That way, rather than going to like the WoW site and seeing the names of the spells, which is great, I can't actually hover over them and know what they are, so I end up going to a site like Wowhead anyways to figure out what the spells are. This has the nice 2-in-1 combo. The one asterisk I'm going to say to that is double check some of the spells and the tooltips when you're looking at them because some of them are not completely updated to what the World of Warcraft changes have been made to on the site of World of Warcraft itself. So just do a double check when you guys are going through that. But for the most part, it's very good, and I think it's the best site to go to if you want to learn the spells, in my case scenario. So, starting right off of the bat, overall, Frost DK got some pretty nice buffs. They got 50% damage to Howling Blast, 20% damage to Obliterate, which, in my opinion, I think was necessary. I think that Death Knights, specifically Frost DKs, they do a lot of burst damage, but I do feel like they are a very squishy target, and after they have that all-in threat, they weren't doing too much, and if you can kite them or get away from them or deal with them for those for their initial burst with their artifact weapon, then you were pretty much good to go. So I think that this was a good buff in my opinion, and it'll make DKs a little bit more relevant. They also increased death coil damage by 50%, which I think is good as well too for unholy DKs. I just felt like DKs in general were a little bit underrepresentative on the ladder, and not as many people would play them. You would pretty much only see them with like a warrior, sometimes an enhanced shaman, and sometimes an assassination rogue, but I feel like this is going to help them make them a little bit more relevant and you'll see them more often. So I'm a big fan of those changes. Demon Hunter changes are pretty much irrelevant. I honestly would say don't worry about them. Most of the changes are for vengeance. There's some small changes that they did mechanically to help people out that play Demon Hunter with some GCD issues, but it's really nothing serious to look at there. So let's just move on to the next one. Druid got a lot of changes. I could literally sit here and make a 30-minute video specifically on Druid. They got an unbelievable amount of not only spell changes, but on top of that, almost every single spec of Druid had a ton of their honor talents and normal talents moved, swapped, replaced. I'm going to leave that aside because it would literally be a 30-minute video on itself after having looked into it for a little bit myself. Unbelievable amount of things swapped. So I'm just going to go over the generic stuff for you guys, and maybe we can cover that down the line. Some of the big things that were changed with Druids in general, one thing was Swiftmend was buffed by about 70%, which I think is good. It felt like Resto Druids needed a little bit more oomph. The funny thing was, when I was watching the EU regionals versus the NA regionals, you saw that in the EU side of things that almost every team was running a Resto Druid, and then on EU and US, you did see the Resto Druid, but it was also in the mix with Mistweaver Monks and Holy Paladins. So I'm very curious to see when BlizzCon actually happens and that overlap happens, what the teams are going to run healer-wise, because I actually think that Resto Druids are a lot better than people think, and that they've got to be very careful when they're buffing Resto Druids, I think, right now, because I do think that they are a top-tier healer in the right comps, and they have a very high skill cap, but I think the skill cap itself is maybe the asterisk, right? It takes a very good player to be able to play it at the max level, so I think the change is fine. 70% on Swiftmend I think is good. Now, the other thing as well, too, and this took me a little bit to work through, is the Druids got regrowth in place of where Healing Touch was. So for their affinities, right? And I was immediately looking at this and I'm like, wait, is that actually a good thing? So basically when people are playing like Feral Druids right now, you see a lot of times they're running Feral, Priest, Shaman, and you're going for killing the Priest or the Shaman, and the Feral's just sitting there off healing with Healing Touch, casting relatively fast and getting some effective heals off. And I was sitting there, I'm like, well, is Regrowth like actually a nerf or is it a buff? Because like Regrowth actually does a lot of upfront healing, has a high chance to crit on the heal. It's a shorter cast as well too than Healing Touch. Healing Touch is around 2.5 seconds, Regrowth is 1.5. So I was sitting there, I'm like, wait, really? And then I went and looked at the mana, and the mana is a lot different. It's about 20, it's 18.63% to 9% mana, which is more than double. And that's where it started making a little bit more sense to me. I'm like, okay, so they're trying to make it more mana efficient so that they can't do it as often. But I honestly am not even sure if that's enough, because I feel like Regrowth is better than Healing Touch, but maybe there's something I'm missing out that Druids were gaining from Healing Touch, that, swapping it to Regrowth was a better choice. But I still feel like them having that upfront 3 or 4 heals is usually going to be enough for them to get through that situation in the first place. And then having more like upfront burst heals to Regrowth rather than Healing Touch faster, like I'm not actually sure that was like a good change or not. So we'll have to see it through. Very curious to see how that one goes. On top of that, a really small change that I think I'd like to point out here is Incarnation. The Armored Moonkin model is going to show again when they are going into their Incarnation. So it'll be a little bit easier for people to recognize when they are in Incarn, which I actually think is a good change. A little small thing that I thought I would point out that I think is helpful. And for Guardian, there's a 6% Thick Hide went down to 6% to 10%. Restoration Druids, Prosperity, which was your Swiftmend talent that you can take that reduces the cooldown by 5 seconds and gives you 2 charges of Swiftmend. It got cut down to 3 seconds, so that was a interesting change considering that they just buffed Swiftmend by 70%. So maybe they made that change to help balance that out is what I'm thinking. And Cultivation is, I believe it's a hot that you get from Rejuve. Yeah, it's a hot that you get off of Rejuve when you're below 60%. So they increased that a little bit to help with healing for them there. Now, one of the classes that got a massive buff was Survival Hunters. As you can see, they got huge damage increases across the board. 100% on Raptor Strike, 150% on Carve. Butchery, which is a talented form of Carve, got a 35% increase. Throwing Axes, which is a talent, also took 25% increased damage. And they had one of their talents completely redesigned, which is called Animal Instincts. And basically what it does is, rather than the old animal instincts used to give you buffs based on which attack you used, now what it does is your Flanking Strike will randomly choose Flanking Strike, Mongoose Bite, Aspect of the Eagle, or Harpoon, and it will reduce the remaining cooldown on one of those abilities. So interesting change. They changed it from like a buff to CDR, which I think is an interesting change. Not playing Survival Hunter myself, I'm not sure if that's actually a positive change or not, but it is very different. You're mitigating buffs for, uptime and CDR. So interesting to see how that goes, and especially after they gave some buffs to the damage. Very curious to see how that goes. I think Survival Hunter got one of the biggest just straight damage increase buffs out of any single class. So very curious to see how that affects the ladder. Going into Mage now too. So Arcane got pretty much straight buffed, and I am really like sleeping on the fact that I think that Arcane is going to be very good with their high mobility. They kind of got the sleeper buff, 17%, and that's a lot of their damage right there. A lot. So I'm very curious to see how they end up doing with having so much mobility in a melee heavy meta. They seem very slippery, and if the damage is right, very curious to see how Arcane Mage ends up doing after this buff. Fire Mage, I really don't know why Pyroblast got nerfed. I think that was a really dumb nerf, in my opinion. Frost Mage is like by far the superior spec, and I didn't think that Pyroblast by any means was doing any sort of ridiculous damage. If anything, it probably could have used a 6% buff in damage. They did get a buff to Flame Strike and Aftershocks, but kind of a letdown for me. I don't know why Pyroblast needed a 6% nerf. I thought that was very silly. Sucks for people playing Fire Mages. Frost pretty much across the board just got a little bit of damage increase, anywhere from 5 to 10% on spells, which was probably not needed, but it's there anyways. So I mean, I'm cool with the Mage buff there. I'm cool with the Arcane Mage buff. I think Arcane Mage is actually gonna be sleeper really good now because of how much mobility it has and a high melee meta. So watch for that. But I really don't think fire needed any sort of a nerf whatsoever. And frost, I don't think really needed the buff, but here we are. We'll see how those changes affect things. Happy with the arcane, really meh about the other two. Monks didn't get too big of changes in terms of their actual like spells changing, the tooltips or the dynamics of them. A few now heals a little bit more, and there's a talent that you can take as Windwalker a little bit later that I'll show you guys that has a nice little effect with the Effuse buff. Shilon's Gift, which is their artifact power, now also activates Soothing Mist, and Soothing Mist does heal for a little bit more. It did get buffed from 64% to 55%, so a little bit of a buff as well there too. A lot of changes with monks as well too. I'll show you guys a little bit later. Similar to Druid, they had a lot of different honor talent changes later on. Paladins, this was one thing I was kind of unhappy about. So one thing that they did is similar to like what they were working with rest of druids, or excuse me, druids just in general, ferals and boomkin, is they changed the regrowth to the main heal, which I felt like they were doing it for mana purposes. Well, they kind of buffed Flash of Light off heal a little bit, and just in general it got increased by 25%, and the mana cost went up a bit, which I guess is like a way of them saying, okay, well, we'll make the heal a little bit more effective, but it's going to cost a little bit more mana, and I'm like kind of impartial to that. Sanctified Wrath got nerfed a little bit, which is going to make the Avenging Wrath not last quite as long. Not anything huge for Holy Paladin there, though. I would say the biggest change that I was kind of like pretty unhappy about was the Holy Wrath change. Now, Holy Wrath, the thing that I have a problem with Holy Wrath is that there's pretty much no way to tell if a Ret Paladin's running Holy Wrath until he actually uses it. There's not like the other two options they have, they don't give you like any like straight up like indication whether or not they're running it or not. So it's you pretty much just have to assume that Ret Paladins are playing with it, and you have to respect that and keep your distance and keep your health with Holy Wrath so you don't get one shot. And basically what happened is now they basically buffed Holy Wrath, which I feel like was one of the spells that really absolutely did not need a buff. Did not need a buff whatsoever. If there was some sort of way with the other two choices that they made that made it indicative that they were choosing Holy Wrath, maybe I wouldn't care as much, but just because of how random it is, they really didn't need it's not exactly a 20% buff, but basically what they did is if your health's at like 2 million, right? So it's 120% of your health, right? So it would put you at like 2.4 million. So rather than doing 1 million damage against a PvP target, you're now doing 1.2 million damage, which I just think is like, okay, let's just like randomly buff Ret Paladin again. I don't think that was needed at all. Really unhappy with that change, but it is what it is. Curious to see how you guys think about that one. Blade of Wrath, this talent got completely reworked, and it now makes your auto attacks have a chance to reset the cooldown on Blade of Justice, which is a good damaging ability, 10.5 second cooldown, so help you get a little bit more uptime. Once again, I don't know if that was necessary either. I think it was just to encourage people to take that rather than the stun choice where when you stun, your Blade of Justice does like 3 times the damage. Just put another option out there for people. And then the other thing as well too is I really don't feel like Protection Paladin needed any sort of buffs at all. Like maybe they needed it for PvE, but for PvP purposes, like Prop Paladin's already really toxic on the ladder. And I don't think that they needed any of this, because now it's just going to be more appealing for people. Not a fan of the Prop Paladin buffs like whatsoever. All the tank buffs, man, are just like, I guess this is the only one that really receives some sort of buffs, but I definitely think people have picked up on it and are going to be playing it more often, which is like a huge bummer. So unfortunate, especially Bastion of Light I think can be very good. You know, a minute completely taken off of that to give 3 charges of Shield of Righteous I think is like really strong. Shield of Righteous is like one of the main abilities that rotates for Prop Paladin and does good damage and helps them rotate through a lot of their spells. So really not a fan of any buffs right now for Prop Paladin and PvP. The whole tank thing is just absolutely it's kind of a joke at this point. I think it's one of the only things in Legion right now that's making it really stale. And I think that Blizzard really needs to take some action on it because people are just getting sick of it. Ugh. Like we're gonna see prot specs in BlizzCon. Feels bad, man. Not cool. Okay, so I don't think prot needed any sort of buff, at least for PvP. Don't play PvE, so can't speak on it. Looking at your Disc Priests, now the one thing that I'm torn on the one thing that I'm really torn on for Disc Priest is Clarity of Will, and I'm torn on this because I feel like in twos that just made like Disc Assassination Rogue, which was already like the best 2v2 comp in the game, like even better. So now you are forced to, when you're dealing against a Disc Priest in twos, you're forced to kick Shadow or Holy when they're playing Clarity of Will, but then you can't stop the other, so you either have to have like a stun or silence or some way to deal with that, which is really hard in a 2v2 setting to deal with that. Do I think it's going to help them in 3v3s? Yeah, I do, and I think it is a positive change for threes, but I just think it made the 2v2 scene like which was already cancer, like way more cancerous, and I felt like Blizzard could have done a better job at helping out Disc Priest without completely like, I feel like Clarity of Will is too strong in 2v2 specifically, and I feel like it's just going to make things like way worse. So I like to see that they're buffing Disc Priest like for the 3v3 scene, but man, was that a bad, that's going to hurt twos already. They've already hurt twos enough with that, but that's really going to have a toxic impact. So not happy with that change overall. I felt like they could have done some other things, rather, maybe buff some spells baseline to help out Disc Priest rather than taking the route on that. Curious to see how it ends up playing out. Holy Priest pretty much across the board got some healing buffs, which I think was needed for pretty much just like any area in World of Warcraft, so that's awesome. I think it's good. I'm curious to see how those changes play out. The one thing with Holy Priest is I would love to spend a little bit more time breaking into Holy Priest at some point, because they have some very interesting mechanics that gives them aura mastery healing, and I'm very curious to see if Holy ends up doing well. I think that right now, just because like really the only CC they bring to the table is a stun, like I don't know how much better it's going to be, right? Because I mean, Paladins are just, what do you get from a Holy Priest that you don't get from a Holy Paladin? So I still feel like Holy Priests are kind of in that spot right now, but we'll see. A little bit of buffs there, I'll take it. And then Shadow got some pretty significant buffs, I would say. And I'm really not sure if they needed it or not. They did get an increase of mana on their Power Word Shield to kind of help with the off-healing mana efficiency that they've been dealing with. So it seems like, unanimously across the board, they've been increasing the mana costs of a lot of the spells for people that are playing hybrid specs to make it so that they can't heal as much. So I'm a fan of that. The thing is with Shadow, the big change is they got Shadow Form back, and it's going to stack with Void Form. And this is going to decrease the amount of physical damage they take and increases shadow damage by 10%, which I already think Shadow Priests are strong as it is. And in some comps where you're running like, Resto Shaman, Priest, Feral, like that's a really strong comp already. And now you're reducing the amount of damage that, one of the primary targets is taking and increasing the amount of damage they're doing, which is already a strong place. I'm not sure if this was actually needed or not. I know it's a spell that probably a lot of people are happy to see come back into the game because it is so classic and core to World of Warcraft to see Shadow Form come back, but I'm very curious to see how it actually ends up doing. I think it's going to overtune things a little bit for Shadow Priest. I'm not sure if it was a necessary buff, but maybe I'm thinking about it in the best context where, as I said, I'm thinking about like Resto, Priest, Feral Druid, which I feel like is probably the best comp for Shadow Priest right now, and it is one of the best comps. It's one of the strongest and safest comps in the game because it's triple heal, very strong. So I'm very curious how that ends up doing. Specifically like the 10% damage reduction. I don't know. I think that them being squishy is important to that comp being leveled out and having like some vulnerabilities. Rogue, Outlaw saw a little bit of buff on some of the sustain and consistent damage, which I think is a positive. Other than that, not really some huge changes. Kingsbane, which is the artifact weapon for Assassination Rogue, got a 1 combo point. One of the big changes that I want to talk about are two of these last classes here, guys. And one of them is Elemental Shamans. Now, this Elemental Shaman's got some big changes here, okay? So Frost Shock, which you can combo with Ice Fury, and Ice Fury empowers your next 4 Frost Shock's damage. Frost Shock got a 15% buff, and Earth Shock got a 15% buff, so you scale that with Ice Fury, and you're talking about some more burst damage coming from Elemental Shaman, and on top of that, they completely changed their artifact weapon, which I wasn't even aware of, and I spent some time reading about it when I saw the change here, and it says Stormkeeper now also makes the affected lightning bolts and chain lightning instant. So what Stormkeeper does is it makes your lightning bolts and chain lightning deal 200% increased damage. Now they're also instant cast. And the only change to this is that Stormkeeper was instant before, and now it is a 1.5 second cast time. So now when you're playing against Ellie Shamans, you're going to have to keep this in mind. When you see Stormkeeper, like, this is something that you may need to interrupt in some situations, because this is going to be burst damage for them. They can line up Ice Fury, they can line up Lightning Bolts, and kind of save up like a lot of instant cast burst on someone with their Maelstrom really high, and then unleash a lot of instant cast damage. I think that honestly, like, I like the change for Elemental Shamans, and I definitely think that Blizzard did a good job with this. Like, it made Ellie Shaman's damage a little bit more viable and more relevant, so I like the change. Very curious to see how that goes. From someone that I personally leveled the Elemental Shaman before the expansion hit, like, I'm excited to see those changes, but it's something that as players going into the game, I mean, a spell that was instant cast just got turned into a cast time, and now it's very relevant for the spec. So you got to keep out for Stormkeeper. It's going to be a big change. And the second class that I think got a ton of really big changes was Warlock. Now, I'm going to cover just Affliction first. Affliction pretty much just got damage buffs across the board. A few talents were changed here and there. Compounding Horror was changed to do UA damage done instantly, and it can stack up to 5 times, where it was buffing the amount of damage before that UA just did, period, by like 5%. So a little bit of a change, more like instant upfront damage as opposed to like UA stacking. I definitely think with the UA buff that you're going to see a lot more Affliction Warlock on the ladder, and especially in combination with Ellie Shaman, I actually think that that's going to be a very strong comp, and you're going to see a lot of LSD on the come up. I think it can do very well now with the Warlock buffs, and also seeing the Shaman there. I definitely would expect to see that coming up in the next few weeks. Now, on top of that, I think that the biggest change for Warlocks in general was the nerfs to Demonology, which were definitely needed. And this combos in a lot of different ways, and I talked about it a little bit on my Demonology Warlock breakdown that I did a week ago, where I really went into detail talking about Demonology Warlocks to help you guys and myself get a better idea for how they were working. Now, what ended up happening is Demon Skin, which is currently in the row with Mortal Coil and Shadow Fury, got swapped with Demonic Circle, and Demonic Circle's currently in the row with Dark Pact. So now you have to make a choice between Demon Skin and Dark Pact. And on top of that, the catch for people that don't play Warlocks like myself, the catch with the second nerf that they did there, so not only do you have to choose between Demon Skin and Dark Pact now, but the second nerf that they did on top of that is Demonic Empowerment now increases health by 20%, and it was 50% before. And the reason why this is a big deal, and you may be like, wait, what the heck? Dark Pact Shield was increased by the amount of health that your demon has. It was taking health from your demon, and that's what the shield is based off of. So the 20% nerf to that actually is a huge nerf to Dark Pact, which now puts Warlocks in a spot where they are killable, and they're not going to be this like turret damaging class that you have to run from when they do Casting Circle and you just can't hit. They will very much be killable. And first off, I think it's good for the game that they made that change. Second off, though, I don't want people to think that they're just like a crappy class now, though, because now you're going to have basically what's going to happen is where you took Demon Skin before, now you're going to have Demonic Circle, you're going to have Shadow Fury, and Mortal Coil. So you're going to either have some kiting options available or some CC available too as well, too, which is good for the game that it's not like a class just sitting there and turret tanking, like doing a ton of damage, and you can feel like you can kill it, but at the same time, too, don't kid yourself. Warlocks are still going to be good. TLDR. I definitely think Warlocks are still going to be in a really good place. I do like the change, though. I think it makes the game more interactive and doesn't make you feel like, you know, whenever a Warlock's casting, you can't hit him and you can't do anything about stopping his damage half the time. So I definitely think it's a positive change for the game. Fury across the board got buffed damage-wise. I don't know if it's good enough to actually make them relevant in PvP. Really unsure about that because of how much damage they already take. Even a defensive stance warrior right now as an arms warrior is still taking quite a bit of damage. And really, honestly, the changes that arms warriors got, I mean, hamstring got put on the global cooldown, and I think that's a huge nerf. And the only positive coming out of that is the combo with tactician, which makes the rage spent give them a chance to reset on Colossus, which I mean, overall, I think that's a nerf. And that's shitty for warriors because here's the thing with warriors, that one talent with arms warrior decided how much damage they were doing, which is just like, it really is crazy to think about how big of an impact Echo Slam actually had for warriors doing damage. And now that got nerfed and like just cut in like half, arguably even more than that, warriors are in a really bad place. And I feel like there's a few classes, specs, I guess I should say, this expansion, like arms warriors and Havoc demon hunters, that just got completely shut down by changing like one or two abilities or talents. In this case, arms warrior is a talent, and I really think arms warrior deserved a better look at than what they got going into 7.1. Disappointed by that, and I'm sure a lot of warrior players feel like they're in a bad spot. Curious to see if the Fury changes are good enough to actually make it relevant. I have a feeling they're not, just because of the damage increase that they're taking. I think that you just can't afford to do that. There's too many tanky melee right now that are already doing insane damage that don't take like extra damage on top of being enraged. I just think that's not going to be good enough. So disappointing. At least they're making changes to Fury, which I think is like good. At least they're addressing it, but disappointing for people playing arms. Now we're going to break into some of the honor talents. I'll give you guys a little bit of heads up. Some of these classes like DK actually got like quite a bit of a revamp, and they had some honor talents just completely redesigned. I'll go through and cover these really quickly just because they were easier to do. I actually have them pulled up on a separate monitor here. And I think that these changes are actually very good for Death Knights. So basically your last two honor talent rows got completely changed and mixed up, and the abilities got changed. So I'll just go through them and break them down for you guys really quickly. So you're going to be choosing between, in your 5th row, Death Chill, which causes your Death Grip to automatically apply Chains of Ice free of cost, and your Chains of Ice will root them in place for 4 seconds if they already have it applied on them, which I think is good. It's going to make them it's going to make DKs have a little bit more uptime. Or you can choose your Remorseless Winner to root them in place for 4 seconds when cast. And there's a tie-in with Remorseless Winner that also makes their slow non-dispellable, I believe. I'll go check that in a second, which I think is good as well too. So you have some options there for like an AoE root or a single target root as well too. This will probably be better against casters. Death Chill and Frozen Center will probably be better against the melee teams that you're fighting. And Delirium, I had to look this up. This is one of the things on Wowhead where the tooltip wasn't right, and I had to go and actually like figure out this is correct. This is the correct tooltip, but the one that's on the patch notes one is not correct, and there's a few things here and there where you just got to double check and check for yourself, like I said up front. It's a disease that debilitates the target's movement, reducing the cooldown recovery rate of movement-enhancing abilities by 25% and stacks 2 times. So I actually really like this move, and I think that it could be very good against classes like mages, Windwalker monks, even in some cases like rogues, like stopping them from shadow stepping, even though I don't think it's like the biggest deal ever. Big fan of this talent. I think it's very unique, very cool talent. I very much like this row. I think Death Chill will also be very good against mages as well too. So I'm not sure how often you'll take Delirium, but definitely an interesting spell, and I'm very curious to see how people apply it in the game. Very cool. Good job by Blizzard, I think, on that one. I think it made some very interesting choices. Now in your final row, this is kind of like some damage boost that you get. And Tundra Stalker is going to increase the amount of damage you do with your Frost Strike by 25% and critical strike chance by 50% on rooted targets. So that combos very nicely with Death Chill and Frozen Center if you're playing with that talent. This is going to reduce the overpowered rune weapon. It's going to reduce the cooldown on your empowered rune weapon by 2 minutes. Your empowered rune weapon, it's quite a bit of damage, so this is going to be like a more bursty kind of all-in build to give yourself another cooldown and a shorter cooldown rather than having it be very long, which I think it's like 3 minutes off the top of my head. And then finally you have Chill Streak, which does frost damage to the target, and it reduces their speed by 70% for 4 seconds. And it can bounce up to multiple targets, so this is good maybe against some melee cleaves if you want to get a little bit more burst damage, and they reduce the cooldown of it by 15 seconds, which I think is reasonable. I think that honestly, I think Tundra Stalker looks really good for consistency and overpowered rune weapon, maybe for that burst build. I'm not sure how often you actually use Chill Streak or not. I don't play DK, but it looks like the most unfavorable of the three. And then that's where I was talking about earlier, where Remorseless Winter Snare now cannot be dispelled, which I think is good too. Kind of like how one of the sleeper things I think is really good about Frost Mages is Chill to the Bone. Like when you get Cone of Cold, you can't be dispelled. And I think that that's like another good thing that they put in the game to help DKs get a little bit more uptime when they are able to get to their target. So I'm a fan of that. I think that that's a good change. Maybe they'll end up being very sticky now and it'll be hard to get away from DKs, but I like to see them go in that direction to try to help them out a little bit, get some uptime. Once again, touching on Druids, they had a ton, an absolute boatload amount of talent changes. I could literally make a 30-minute video just on Druids, so I really don't want to go into it heavy. Something maybe I can do down the line. You Druid players are going to want to check for yourself. I'm going to encourage you as well, too, for you guys that are wanting to check this out, go to ptr.wowhead.com, and you can see all the updated talents as opposed to the old talents, and this will probably shift over as well too in the next couple of days to the normal talents once they update it to current. But for now, it's on the ptr.wowhead.com. You can go check out all the new talents as well there too. Pouncing Strikes got changed a little bit, and this is one of the abilities that was giving ferals a lot of uptime, and when they would rake, it would allow them to jump to their target. That no longer is the case, and it no longer applies to rake, so I think that that's a positive change to the game. It kind of stops ferals from feeling like they're always on top of you, being able to get bleeds out on your entire team, just bouncing around everywhere. I think that's a positive change. Tranquility is going to be double the amount of healing, which I think is good. It gives Druids kind of a way to pick up their whole team, get some like reliable healing in. Excuse me, guys. And then the last change that I thought that was really interesting was the Nourish. And Nourish got completely revamped, and now it's a talent, and it reduces the cast time of your healing touch by 0.5 seconds. And if you're missing one of your hots on the target, it's going to end up putting a random hot on the target. And if it doesn't, if you have all the hots up on the target, it's going to make the healing touch crit, which I think is very cool. Super good. Cool talent, and that's in the same row as your Ironbark talent, so you can either choose your Ironbark to be on a shorter cooldown, or you can go with Nourish, which I think is a very interesting change. You know, some more healing benefits rather than, you know, a cooldown choice, so very interesting there. Mistweaver also got a lot of talent changes. I'm in a really weird spot because I don't play Mistweaver whatsoever, and I don't heal, and I can't really tell from a lot of these changes if they actually got buffed or not, but basically what they did with a lot of the talents here that they changed is they made them more appealing for the other options that were in the row. Some of these were not the favored talents. For instance, like Healing Sphere was definitely not the favored talent in that row. So they made it a little bit more appealing by taking the cooldown by 15 seconds and increased the healing by about 40%. So some of these changes and Mistweavers I think were done to make it more appealing. I'm not sure how often that they will actually be used, but something like I still don't actually know if Healing Sphere is going to be usable, but they did make it more appealing, and I feel like that's pretty much what they did for Mistweavers with a lot of the talent changes. Windwalker, I'm definitely a fan of what they did with Windwalker. People that play Windwalker are going to be upset because heavy-handed strikes, which made your Fist of Fury when you're running around, when you would run around and stun everyone, it would stun everyone while you were channeling it. Now you can only do it on your first tick of Fist of Fury, so you have to actually be on the targets that you want to stun, and you can't just run around like 15 feet and like stun everyone. Like, so I think that was like a good change to the game. And on top of that too, they added in Grapple Weapon, which gives them a 6-second, 60-second cooldown disarm. That sounded weird, but I think that is a really good change in the game, and they put that in the same row as heavy-handed strikes. So if you're playing a comp like Rogue Windwalker or maybe even Frost Mage Windwalker or DK Windwalker, and you just feel like we're going against a comp where, you know, we could benefit from actually having the disarm. Maybe we're playing against double melee and it would help us out for a little bit more survivability. I like that they put that option into the game, and I feel like that was a positive thing, and it's one of those talents where it gives the players a choice to make where they can decide for themselves what talent they want to go with. Would they benefit more from the disarm, give their healer some time to catch up, or take the stun for a little bit more control and lock down for their kill target? Definitely a fan of that change. It definitely gives some players some options, and I think that you will be able to use both. The last big change for Windwalker, I would say, is the Yu'lon's Gift, which now basically Yu'lon's Gift was used when you would roll or Serpent Kick, it would allow you to get out of snares and roots. Now it's only going to apply with Serpent Kick. Not playing a Windwalker myself, but I still realize that's probably really shitty for people that play Windwalker, so that's probably a nerf, but something like Disabling Reach definitely does help make up for that, and it increases the range on Hamstring for them to 12 yards from 5, which I think is really strong. So even if they aren't able to quite connect on targets, they'll be able to get them slowed and be able to reconnect. So I think that helps balance out not being able to have Yu'lon's Gift. Finally, this Paladin change you don't really have to worry about. There's nothing crazy there. Restoration Shamans here. I think that what they did with, they wanted to make the honor talent for Spirit Link more appealing. And basically what the honor talent does is, rather than split the health of your teammates that are in Spirit Link, it just transfers the damage to the people that are in it. 50% of the damage is transferred to the other people that are in it. So if you're in it with 2 people, the main person that's being attacked, 50% of that damage will go to the other person. But let's say you're in it with all 3 of your teammates in a 3v3, both the 50% will be split between the 2 teammates. So they're trying to make that more appealing for people to take. I'm not sure if it's actually good enough where you just wouldn't want to just flat level out your health if someone's low. Interesting change. I wonder if anyone will actually end up playing with that. Curious to see how that goes. And then a buff to Earth Shield as well too, where it is proccing on 6% of health as opposed to 10. So it'll proc more often, you'll get a little bit more healing from that, but it'll also at the same time rotate through the Earth Shield charge sooner, so people have to put it up more often. Finally, we're almost at the end here, guys. This has been quite a rant for me, but one of the last classes that a lot of people have been talking about, and it's nice that we're able to save this for the end, is Warlocks. And Destruction Warlocks got a really big buff that a lot of people have been talking about, and that is Focus Chaos, and that's going to increase the amount of damage you do on your Chaos Bolt by 150%. Now I know it says 200% here, but this is one of those changes that I was talking about where if you actually go check the tooltip and you go check the WoW site, it is 150%. So you got to double check a few things when you're using the WoW head, but I do recommend checking out the WoW head because it shows all the spells here, and I think that that's really helpful for someone like myself that's playing multiple class or only playing one class, and to be able to learn all the other classes spells. Super helpful. So once again, I'll make sure I have this link down below for you guys in the description for you guys to check this out, as well as Cremation. Cremation as well too has only a 5% of the target's total health and fire damage as opposed to 8%. So a little bit of a tooltip change. But Focus Chaos is one of the big things that people have been talking about. So your other targets no longer benefit from having Havoc, but your single target burst is going to be way higher. And, you know, class, I think it's going to end up comboing very well with classes like Frost Mage, Boomkin, where you have like 2 casters that are like huge threats to do like big single target damage. And you feel like, oh, well, we have to choose one of them to lock down and then the other one's going to play the game. So I definitely think this was a positive change for Destruction Warlock that was kind of like Arcane Mage, where it was kind of like in this, like, I would say like less than average ground, and I feel like this is some changes to some of the talents to help them get back on track, put them in a good spot, and make them more relevant again. So overall, there were some good changes. Like, if I had to say my favorite changes that were coming into this coming into the patches, I very much like the ally shaman buffs, very much like the warlock buffs. Those of you guys that are playing Druid players, you are going to have a headache. They made a ton of talent changes in your talent and honor trees, but I think that you will also like the changes they made. I just literally cannot cover it. This is a already very long video as it is, and I want to make it as condensed as possible, and I just couldn't be able to talk about it, but I think that you guys will like some of the changes as well that they made to Wrestle Druids to make things more efficient. But I guess a few of my knocks is, you know, not enough for warriors, arms warriors. I don't feel like Holy Wrath really needed the extra damage considering you couldn't touch on it. I did like that they made Demonology Warlocks kind of a killable target and not this fucking turret that just sits there and you have to run away and like not play the game for, and they drop Fel Lords. So yeah, I think they brought Demonology back down to earth, which was another positive as well too. So interested to see how things play out, guys. I know this is a very long video. I tried to do the best I could to condense the information for you guys, but be able to give my opinion on some of the things and how it will end up playing out for you guys. I'm gonna go now. Very tired, super late here, guys. I just wanted to make sure I get this out early for you guys so that you guys jumping into the patch have some information to go off of, and you can at least bounce off of my opinion and my personal opinion on how things will go. You can compare that to what you think for yourself. Very interested to see how the next week goes in PvP and seeing what different classes get thrown out there. I'm gonna head off to bed here, dudes. I am very tired. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you guys on the next video or on the live stream during the afternoon, dudes. As always, keep it easy, dudes. Peace. Later, guys. Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Buns. Welcome back to the Road to Gladiator. I gotta keep it quiet tonight. Family is asleep, but I wanted to put out this video tonight. This is the first segment I'm going to do of this new series I'm adding